Let's jump right into this explainer and look at what is, without a doubt, the ultimate CEO job listing. Seriously, forget tech startups or Fortune 500 companies. We're talking about a leadership role where millions of lives are literally on the line every single day. Today, we're unpacking the strategic guide for the incoming executive director of the United Nations World Food Program. It's a job description that reveals the immense and honestly overwhelming realities of feeding a hungry planet.
120 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. The sheer, staggering scale of it is almost hard to wrap your head around, right? We're talking about 120 million vulnerable people. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the equivalent of the entire population of Japan, or more than a third of the United States. And they're all relying on this single agency for their most basic survival. The person stepping into this role isn't just managing accounts, they're managing immediate life-or-death food security for a massive fraction of humanity.
And behind that colossal effort is a massive human engine, a global workforce of over 17,000 staff members. These aren't just people sitting in comfy office cubicles. They are deployed across 120 different countries, frequently operating in the absolute most dangerous and complex conditions you can imagine. From disaster zones to active front lines, managing this team requires an incredible commitment to their safety and psychological well-being.
Now, whoever takes on this leadership role also inherits an astronomical financial responsibility, an annual budget of $6.4 billion. But, and this is a massive catch, this isn't a guaranteed budget that's just automatically handed over by the UN. They literally have to fight to replenish this massive sum every single year in a world facing severe economic constraints.
Chapter 1: The World's Toughest Job.
The organization's own strategic guide perfectly captures the immense pressure of directing the world's largest humanitarian agency, calling it one of the most consequential, demanding, and symbolically significant positions in the entire UN system. The person in this chair has to be a humanitarian operator, a development investor, and an advocacy voice, all wrapped into one. They report to a 36-member state executive board, and their decisions carry unparalleled global weight.
Chapter 2: A World in Crisis.
Because the incoming leader isn't just managing an organization, they're stepping into a deeply alarming convergence of disasters. Active civil wars and conflicts in places like Sudan, Gaza, and Yemen remain the absolute primary drivers of acute food insecurity. Add to that the devastating El Niño climate shocks destroying harvests across Africa, severe economic disruptions, inflation, and the lingering aftershocks of the pandemic. These compounding crises are driving hunger to levels we honestly haven't seen in decades, pushing the global goal of zero hunger severely off track.
To navigate all this chaos, the director must ruthlessly enforce what's called a needs-based response. This is a totally non-negotiable operational standard. It means assistance goes strictly to the most vulnerable, period. It doesn't go to who is easiest to reach or who has the most political leverage. It ensures that marginalized groups, particularly women, who play central roles in food systems but face systemic discrimination, as well as children and people with disabilities, get help first.
Chapter 3: Beyond Just Food Delivery.
It's a logistical nightmare, right? So how exactly does an agency of this scale manage to efficiently reach 120 million individuals across completely different geographies, cultures, and conflict zones?
Well, the answer lies in a major transformation of their operating model. A massive strategic pivot is happening right now, shifting away from just physical, in-kind food drop-offs and moving toward digital, cash-based assistance. When local markets are actually functioning, giving people cash or digital vouchers is way more cost-effective. Plus, it stimulates the local economy, and most importantly, it preserves human dignity by letting families choose what they eat. They're also leaning heavily into facilitating national governments and local actors to lead the response, rather than trying to micromanage every single delivery themselves.
But the WFP isn't doing this alone. The executive director has to collaborate flawlessly with other Rome-based agencies to cover the entire spectrum of food insecurity. It's like a giant puzzle. You have the WFP handling the emergency humanitarian response. Then you have the FAO tackling agricultural governance and technical standards. And finally, IFAD focusing on rural development and smallholder finance. If these three don't work together seamlessly, the whole global food security system basically fractures.
Ultimately, the WFP is actively aligning its staff to work across an integrated spectrum, what they call the humanitarian, development, and peace-building nexus. Because you can't just hand out food and leave. You have to provide immediate relief, follow it up with investments in agricultural resilience, and then use that stability to actually foster peace.
Chapter 4: Operating in War Zones.
When operating in conflict zones, core humanitarian principles, humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence are absolutely essential. And these aren't just feel-good buzzwords. They are literal shields used during intense diplomatic negotiations. Sticking strictly to these principles is the only way the WFP can secure access across blockades and into active conflict zones without being viewed as a partisan threat by warring factions. Executing massive operations in places like Sudan, Gaza, and Yemen requires the executive director to engage in high-level humanitarian diplomacy, often directly with heads of state. They have to constantly balance the agonizing personal risks to their 17,000 staff members on the ground against the absolute, uncompromising necessity of delivering life-saving aid to populations trapped behind blockades and crossfire.
Chapter 5: The Funding Dilemma.
What makes this role existentially difficult is that the WFP does not have a guaranteed budget. Unlike other UN bodies that get predictable, assessed contributions from member states, practically every single dollar of that $6.4 billion budget must be voluntarily raised. That means the executive director has to be the world's most persuasive fundraiser, constantly courting traditional bilateral donors, emerging economies, and the private sector. And right now, donor fatigue is colliding with unprecedented global need. This creates a record funding gap. Because the money simply isn't keeping pace with the crises, the executive director is forced to make heartbreaking choices. We're talking about actively cutting food rations for starving populations or suspending programs entirely just to stretch the budget a few more weeks. It is an agonizing reality of the job.
Chapter 6: The Path to Zero Hunger.
In 2020, the WFP was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This monumental recognition is a powerful reminder that delivering food assistance is intrinsically linked to building lasting global peace and stability. You simply cannot have a peaceful world if hundreds of millions of people are starving. Food security is a fundamental global public good.
Which brings us to our final thought. With climate shocks destroying harvests, new conflicts erupting, and funding gaps widening daily, we have to ask ourselves, is the UN's goal of zero hunger actually possible? Or is the world's toughest job only going to get harder from here? The person who steps into this role will undoubtedly shape the answer to that question for generations to come. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that shape our world.